If she stopped reaching out, this isn't because you weren't enough. It's because you were too available in a world that trains desire to chase what it might lose. Listen carefully. I'm not here to flatter you. I'm here to tell you the truth most men never hear, because if you hear it too early, you stop being controllable. As a psychologist, I've seen this pattern repeat across thousands of relationships. Men believe closeness creates attachment. They believe consistency creates security. They believe showing up more will make a woman value them more. That logic makes sense in theory. It is also why so many men feel invisible in their own relationships. Attraction doesn't respond to effort the way respect does. It responds to contrast, to emotional spacing, to the feeling that someone's presence is earned, not guaranteed. When you are always there, you remove the psychological space where missing is born. The brain doesn't long for what it can access at will. It doesn't fantasize about what it already owns. It doesn't replay moments that never had the chance to end. What makes a woman miss you is not absence alone. It's meaningful absence. There is a difference, and most men get this catastrophically wrong. Disappearing without emotional gravity doesn't create desire. It creates confusion or relief. But stepping back after you've created emotional impact, that triggers something primal. The mind starts filling gaps. Memory becomes warmer than reality. Your value quietly increases because your presence is no longer predictable. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Her nervous system is constantly scanning for emotional balance. When you lean too far in, she unconsciously leans out. Not because she's cruel, because human desire seeks equilibrium. You were taught that pulling back is manipulative. It isn't, if it's done from self-respect instead of strategy. The difference matters. One is a tactic, the other is a boundary. When you stop over-explaining, stop chasing reassurance, stop trying to fix every emotional fluctuation, something subtle happens. You signal that your life is anchored, that her validation is welcome but not required for your stability. That is the moment she begins to wonder. Not why doesn't he text me, but why doesn't he need me the way he used to? And that question is dangerous, in the best possible way, because now her mind starts reaching for you emotionally. And whoever the mind reaches for begins to matter again. Most men are afraid of this step because they confuse distance with loss. But attraction doesn't die from space. It dies from pressure. You don't make her miss you by withdrawing love. You make her miss you by withdrawing over-availability. And once you understand this, you'll never beg for attention again. Here's where most men sabotage everything without realizing it. The moment they sense distance, they rush to close it. They send longer messages. They ask heavier questions. They try to clarify the vibe. From a psychological perspective, this doesn't restore connection. It triggers emotional claustrophobia. Attraction requires oxygen. When a woman feels emotionally crowded, her nervous system doesn't interpret it as love. It interprets it as pressure. And pressure activates avoidance, not closeness. This is not a flaw in her character. It's basic human psychology. What makes her start missing you is when your emotional presence becomes selective. Not cold, not distant, selective. You stop responding immediately, not to play games, but because your time has structure. You stop filling silence with explanations. You stop checking in just to check in. And suddenly, the rhythm changes. Silence becomes noticeable. The male mistake is thinking silence means disinterest. In reality, silence creates a mirror. It forces her to feel what she brings into the dynamic. When you were always initiating, she never had to reach. When you step back, the imbalance becomes clear, and imbalance creates awareness. Missing doesn't come from words. It comes from interruption, the interruption of a pattern her brain had grown used to. Her subconscious asks, "What changed?" And once that question appears, emotional investment follows. This is why dramatic gestures don't work. Flowers don't create longing. Apologies don't create desire. Overfunctioning emotionally doesn't make someone miss you. It makes you predictable. Predictability is safe. It is not intoxicating. The moment you stop being the emotional manager of the connection, you become something else. A presence that must be felt, not managed. And here's the key insight most men never hear. Women don't miss men who disappear physically. They miss men who disappear emotionally while remaining grounded. You don't announce your withdrawal. You don't punish. You don't sulk. You simply redirect your energy back into your own center, your work, your health, your purpose, your friendships. That shift registers immediately because now, when she reaches out, she doesn't feel like she's stepping into an emotional vacuum that needs to be filled. She feels like she's stepping into a life already in motion. That creates polarity. Polarity is what creates desire. It's the tension between two complete individuals, not the fusion of one incomplete one with another. When she senses that your happiness no longer hinges on her responses, her curiosity awakens. Not consciously at first, subtly, quietly, in the background of her thoughts. She starts replaying moments. She wonders what you're doing. She checks her phone more often, not because you trained her to, but because absence activated imagination. And imagination is the birthplace of missing. This is not manipulation. This is emotional physics. Energy pulled inward becomes magnetic. Now let's address the fear sitting in your chest while you hear this. The fear that if you pull back, she'll forget you, replace you, move on. That fear is the residue of emotional conditioning, not reality. Attachment anxiety teaches men to believe connection must be maintained constantly, or it dies. But healthy desire doesn't require constant maintenance. It requires respect for emotional autonomy. When you stop monitoring her reactions, something critical happens. You stop leaking power. Power in relationships isn't control over another person. It's control over your own emotional reactions. A woman doesn't miss a man because he waits by the phone. She misses the man who doesn't collapse when uncertainty appears. Think about this carefully. When you were always available, your presence had no edge, no risk, no mystery. Your emotional availability became background noise, pleasant but ignorable. When you step back with dignity, your presence regains weight. This is where men make a second mistake. They confuse emotional withdrawal with emotional shutdown. They go silent out of resentment. They act distant out of ego. That energy is felt immediately, and it repels. Missing is born when your absence feels calm, not angry, when you respond slower but warmer, when you speak less but mean more, when your attention is intentional instead of constant. This creates emotional contrast without emotional damage. From a psychological standpoint, her brain begins reassessing your value, not because you demanded it, but because your behavior signaled self-worth. Self-worth is deeply attractive because it removes desperation from the equation, and desperation is the fastest way to kill desire. You don't need to announce boundaries. You embody them. You don't say, "I'm busy." You are busy. You don't say, "I don't chase." You simply stop chasing. And here's the quiet truth. When you stop chasing, the dynamic reveals itself. Either she steps forward or she doesn't. Both outcomes give you clarity, and clarity is power. If she reaches out, it's because she feels the absence, not because you engineered it, but because you stopped cushioning her from feeling it. If she doesn't, then what you had wasn't attraction. It was convenience. And convenience is not something worth sacrificing your self-respect for. This is why men who learn this principle stop obsessing over outcomes. They no longer fear losing someone who only stayed when effort was one-sided. You become selective with your energy. You invest where there is reciprocity. And paradoxically, this makes you more desirable, not just to her, but to anyone you allow close. Missing doesn't come from trying to be unforgettable. It comes from being grounded enough to be absent without guilt. When your emotional presence is no longer guaranteed, it becomes valuable again. And once value is restored, desire follows naturally, without forcing, without begging, without losing yourself. This is how you become the man she feels instead of the man she manages. Here is the final truth most men never hear, because it forces responsibility back into their hands. You cannot make someone miss you by focusing on them. You make someone miss you by focusing on yourself without resentment and without apology. The moment you stop using attention as currency, everything changes. You stop performing. You stop proving. You stop adjusting your worth based on response time, tone, or availability. And this internal shift is felt before it's understood. From a psychological lens, desire grows in environments where emotional energy flows freely, not where it's monitored. When you detach from outcomes, you create safety. When you create safety, curiosity returns. This is why chasing never works. It keeps your attention outward. It tells her, without words, that your center is unstable, that your emotional state depends on hers. That's not intimacy, that's pressure. What makes her miss you instantly is when your emotional gravity moves inward. You still care. You still show warmth. But you no longer cling. You let conversations end without rescuing them. You let pauses exist without filling them. You let her emotions belong to her. And in that space, something profound happens. She begins to feel you instead of reacting to you. She notices the absence of your constant validation. She senses the shift in energy, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, unsettling way that lingers. Because now, when she thinks of you, there's space for longing. There's room for reflection. There's a gap her mind wants to close. Missing is not a tactic. It's a response to emotional contrast. And once you internalize this, you stop asking, how do I make her miss me? You start asking, am I living in a way that makes my presence valuable? That question changes everything. So here's what I want you to reflect on, honestly, without ego. Were you showing up because you wanted connection or because you were afraid of losing it? Write your answer in the comments. I read them. And if this shifted something inside you, like the video, subscribe for deeper psychological truths, and share this with a friend who keeps giving too much to someone who hasn't earned it yet. Some men need motivation. Others need the truth. Now you have it.